Hey everybody, what's going on? This is John Barrows. Happy Monday. Hopefully you all had a fantastic weekend. I am excited to have a conversation today with actually not only a colleague, but a good friend of mine, Richard Harris. Richard, you want to say hi to everybody? Introduce
Hey,
yourself.
everybody. John, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here, too.
Excited to have a conversation today. Oops, hold on a second. A colleague, but a good friend. Get that? All right, sorry. That was Facebook jumping in on me. So go ahead. Sorry about that.
No worries. I'm glad to be here. It only took me like 57 episodes to finally get on your podcast. So
51, my friend, 51.
51. So thank you. I'm glad to be here. I'm excited as always. Although I feel like we've had so many conversations, we could have made 51 just between the two of us, but that would have bored the audience, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think so. And that's kind of why I was holding you off on this one, because I wanted to make sure that, first of all, I worked out the kinks of the podcast and the make it happen stuff, but also, oops, I'm sharing my screen here. But also, because I wanted to pick a topic that I thought you and I think we could talk about almost anything. But I think this one is near and dear to your heart, specifically the BANT versus NEAT, because you've come up with a new acronym for this. But with that, give people some context of where you're coming from and what the Harris Consulting Group's all about, because I think that'll help everybody else understand kind of where we're going to take this conversation.
Yeah, so where the Harris Consulting Group comes in is, we teach reps how to earn the right to ask questions, and that could be SDRs, that could be AEs, and actually we've revamped all of our content, and now we're focusing on customer success, so I've got a whole separate training for customer success, but it's teaching people how to earn those right to ask questions, and then this is the part you're talking about, John, is what are the right questions to ask? When should we be asking them? How should we be asking them? Is there a specific order we should be asking them in? And that's really where I think what made you ask me to come on today. So I'm super excited to talk about it.
Yeah, because I think everybody kind of struggles with this a little bit, where historically, and everybody rails on it now, but I think it was somewhat appropriate, at least to have some structure to it back in the day of BANT, right? And did BANT come from, I forget, was that like an IBM thing? That was an IBM thing, right?
If I remember my research correctly, I think it came from IBM back in the day in the 60s. And, look, everything is great. Like something is better than nothing. That's the most important thing around a sales process, right? I can tell you my first sales process later, but it's important that we have BANT and we have to respect what it is. And I would argue that as much as I don't like to teach it and don't want to do it, for some people it works. Look, if there's a sales process that you're following and you're crushing your numbers, please ignore anything Richard ever has to say, right? Find a nugget here and there, as John calls them, the golden nuggets.
Right.
But please, if you're crushing it, don't feel like you need to change it just because Richard came in and said something, or even John. Find what works for you, but be open to hearing new ideas.
Yeah, and I think that's, and also just like anything that's applied too specifically, I think is wrong as well, right? So I think any structure is better than no structure, to your point, but anything that goes to the nth degree with it, and that's what has historically frustrated me about BANT, is, and for those of you out there who for some reason don't know what BANT, the acronym is budget, authority, need, and timeline, right? And what I found was that there was this, if applied too strictly, it was, hey, literally, do you have budget for this project? No, I don't. Okay, never mind. Next, click. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. I think the stat out there is something like 80% of purchases within an organization in any given year are not quote unquote budgeted purchases, right?
Right.
Same thing with authorities. Oh, you're not the person that signs off on this contract? See you later. I don't want to talk to you. Oh, there's not a timeline on this? Never mind, right? And to me, I always said the only thing I really give a shit about in BANT, and never really did, was need. Was literally like, do you need this? And whether you know it or not, my job is to understand, can my product really make a difference for your business? Because if there's a genuine need there and it can make a difference, I can find budget for it. I can get to the right people to make the decision. I can extend it. I can expedite a timeline. So for me, the need was really the main piece.
Yep.
And then you better be a decent sales rep once you understand that to expedite all that other shit. So
right.
With that, walk me through NEAT, right?
Yeah.
We haven't talked about this in a while. You came up with this new acronym for it, and talk to me about the justification of why, of the evolution of BANT to NEAT for you.
So I was, I'll be honest with you, right? I'm a sales trainer and I'm always trying to figure out something new and something I can hang my hat on. And I was a little bit newer to the business, and you've been a great friend and mentor. So I was just trying to figure something out that I could create and, create a little buzz around.
Yeah.
But I kept playing with this thing, and I even think I showed you an early rendition one night when we were having drinks or something. And it just sort of fell in that N is for need. Yep. E is for the economic impact of that need. Meaning, do people understand what the value of solving that pain is worth? A is no longer about authority. Even on inbound leads, you don't get to authority. A is about access to authority. Can the person I'm talking with get me a meeting with the right person, right? Can you get me in front of the Pope if that's what I need to do, right? And T is still timeline. That doesn't change. And one of the things that I did when I created this is I made it look like a little compass, with an N on the top and an E over where the east is, and down the bottom is A and T. And it looks like a compass, and that was by design because BANT, you're supposed to sort of follow budget, authority, need, time frame. With neat selling, you don't. Sometimes you're starting the conversation based on timeline or based on, my boss told me to do such and such, right? So now you can have a couple of questions around authority, or you're starting with authority. So it rotates like a compass, right? So there's no specific one that has to come first. I happen to call it neat selling because it made it look good on a logo, and it was easy to trademark, right?
Yeah,
like that
absolutely.
was, that was the reason. So
I like it. And to me, well, for you, and I know it ebbs and flows, but from a qualification standpoint, what do you think is the most important thing? Like if you were to pick one thing to tell a new rep when you're making calls, inbound, outbound, whatever, what do you really need to make sure before you get off that phone and determine whether it's worth taking that next step with somebody? What do you think are really the core things? I mean, I know in general, but
yeah, no, I agree with you. I think it really comes back to need, right? That's the most important thing. And there are different layers of need, right? I sort of call it surface pain to core pain. And I draw this image of the earth, right? You have the surface of the earth, and then you have the mantle, and then you have the outer core and the inner core. Yep. And any pain you talk about first is always a surface pain, right? I don't care what they say, because that's just what they're trying to describe. The key that matters is, why is it so important right now to solve this pain? And how's it going to impact them if they can solve the pain? If you can figure out those two why and how questions, that's when you're going to have real need, not just the surface pain stuff, right?
So this is Sandler pain funnel stuff too, right?
Right.
So
pretty similar.
So I've always kind of, I don't want to say rolled my eyes to a certain degree. And again, I think this goes to any direct application of anything, like two letter of the law type of thing. But I always, the pain funnel with Sandler effectively is there's that surface level pain. Oh, we haven't hit our numbers, right? So let's talk about sales training for us, right? So a client says, oh, well, we need training. Well, why do you need training? Well, we haven't hit our numbers, and we need to improve our conversion ratios or something like that. It's like, okay, well, why? What happens if you don't? That type of thing. From a business standpoint, well, if we don't hit our numbers, then we're going to miss our quarter coming up here. And if we miss our quarter, then we might not get that next round of funding, So from a business standpoint, we're going to suffer. Okay, well, and then what does that mean to you personally, right? So that's that third layer of pain. Well, if we don't hit our targets, then I'm going to get fired. And now I have that thing. And, as a somewhat sophisticated buyer, I've always kind of rolled my eyes at the person that just kind of goes through that and then finds that quote unquote quantifiable pain and then says, well, so every day that you're missing out on training, you're losing $100,000 worth of revenue.
Yeah, but John, come on, buddy. We're not selling to you. All right.
I know, but
come on, look, you bought the timeshare, not me, which is a whole other story.
That's a different story.
Right.
But seriously though, like how often, because I could walk you through a pain funnel, right? And I could be like, all right, Richard, so it's going to cost you, for every hour, what's your hourly rate? For every hour you stop making this decision, it's going to cost you X. But there's always that, okay. It's almost like ROI calculators. I tend to roll my eyes at ROI calculators. Because it's like, I remember a client asked me once, like, to put an ROI calculator. I was like, really? You really want me to do this? And so I said, fine. And I put this whole spreadsheet together with their numbers. And at the end, the number was so ridiculous that I put like this, at the bottom, I put 85% bullshit factor. Like literally 85% bullshit factor. And the number was still ridiculous. Yep. And I told him, you're still not going to believe this. So help me, how do you really walk through that quantifiable pain where somebody actually buys into it?
I think it's how you say things. It's not, and again, I know we're going a little flippant in here, but I
Yeah,
definitely am not the guy who says, well, if you do this and this is your pain and this is what happens and this is what I don't try to turn it around into something like that, right?
right.
I really ask them to discuss it from a feeling perspective,
Okay.
right? Because everything that you buy in life is a feeling, right? Right? Every price has a feeling. That TV feels too expensive.
Yep.
It's not too expensive, it feels too expensive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or this one feels like it's in my budget. So by asking people what their feelings are around the pains you discover, you actually get them to buy in,
Okay.
right? So for example, this is my favorite one to do, and it's a little bit of a budget question, but people say, well, Richard, how much is your training? And I'll say, oh, it's, X number of dollars, for the day. By the way, how does that feel? I don't wait. I don't play let me give my pricing and pause and measure their response.
Yep.
I go completely different and say, how does that price feel? And the answers I get are amazing. People who I think would never say that's expensive go, wow, that feels a little bit more than what I was thinking about.
Yep.
But now I'm talking about the word feeling, because you cannot take away that word, right?
Right.
There are people who I would think that would say, oh, that's not, they were like, oh, that doesn't feel bad at all. And I would have thought for sure I was out of the ballpark on it.
Right.
And so it's an interesting way. So for me,
I like it.
driving towards the feeling and the emotion versus a little bit more of trying to flip it into that ROI calculator is what matters to me.
Yeah. And I'm similar in the sense, I actually like that approach of like, how does that feel to you? Because it really I'm guessing it gets a pretty genuine on the spot answer. It's like,
yes, they can't,
it feels good or it doesn't feel good. And then you can address it. Right.
Yep. And the rule of reciprocity in life won't allow them to let that question go unanswered.
Right.
They are obligated as a human, regardless of, and that's not even a US thing. Like I've tested it with different people in different cultures, and everybody does it.
Yep. So I like that. And I'm similar in the sense that I talk more generalities than specifics from a pain standpoint. Right. I'll do back a napkin math on stuff to say, okay, for us, and again, we'll use the easy examples because we're both in the same field here. Like for instance, and I recommend everybody do this, ask some like 2 or 3 go-to questions up front that are obvious questions for you to ask, but are meant for a reason. So for instance, for us, it's what's your average deal size, right? So if somebody says their average deal, their ACV is $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, and then all of a sudden they say, and I tell them the training's going to cost whatever, 20 grand. And they're like, they have a heart attack. It's like, well, now this is a pretty easy justification here. Like if I get you one extra deal, it pays for itself. So come on, right? Thankfully, I think our ROI is a little bit easier to quantify in the short term than a lot of other companies is.
Yes.
So how do you, so let's kind of pivot, but as it relates to pricing, right? Because this kind of aligns with the budget question, and do they have budget? I personally don't like saying, what is your budget? I think that's terrible, because if somebody says $20,000, a rep's going to sell $19,999 worth of shit to them, right?
If we're lucky, they'll sell that much.
Yeah, exactly. I
end up selling it like $11,000.
Yeah, no shit, right? But I think I like asking, is this a budgeted thing, right? Because that tells me how far along you are in the sales process. But let's talk about pricing here for a minute. For your experience, how early do you bring up pricing? How do you present pricing? And then obviously I understand how you deal with it after that. Once you deliver, you say, how do you feel about that? But what's your philosophy on budget and also discussing pricing in the qualification phase? And one more preface to this, because a lot of companies actually tell their SDRs, you're not allowed to talk pricing. Right. So it actually gives them sorry, I'm not authorized to have that conversation, which to a certain degree might actually be a good thing. But if you evolve, you should be able to at least have a logical conversation, because I'm going to be annoyed if I ask you give me a general overview, at least how much this price, and you can't give me that price. I'm going to be kind of pissed at it. So what's your thought process and philosophy around budget, pricing, and the qualification?
So there's a couple things I want to say too, is that, there are at least 2 different types of SDR teams. There's the SDR team, because that's who we're talking about today, John.
Yep.
Hey, we're 6 months in, we're just starting our SDR team. They don't have enough chops yet, and it's not their fault. It's just a lack of experience to answer questions like budget, right? So if you've got an early stage SDR team who doesn't have a lot of experience, I wouldn't have them talking about it. Look, if you're Zoom, right, who we're using today, or one of my clients, but they've got a very sophisticated SDR team. Their SDRs have been there 12 months, 18 months longer. Then maybe those experienced people could start to do that, because that's even part of a career path. So I want to make sure that when people hear these answers, they're thinking about it in the context of their SDR team, not all SDR teams, right? Because not all SDR teams are created equal. So in terms of budget, the first thing I tell everybody, I don't care if you're an SDR or an AE, stop using the word budget and stop using the word pricing. Right. Let the prospects bring up those things, right? Anytime they bring up the word price or budget or cost, I immediately tell everybody to change that word to commercial terms. John, I know that you want to talk about commercial terms. I'm happy to do that. Because commercial terms now means we have to agree on something, that there's a give and a take, there's an ebb and flow, not I have a budget and you have a price and you've got to make your price fit in my budget, period.
Okay.
Because there's lots of things that can be negotiated in a commercial term. Logo usage, case study, use cases, all kinds of stuff. So when you start changing the language, I think it sounds more professional,
sure.
To a certain extent. And two, it gives you a little bit more comfort and courage as a sales rep or an SDR to talk about pricing so it doesn't feel like you're giving away something for nothing, which is the biggest challenge I think we have.
Okay.
In terms of when do you bring it up? Whenever the prospect wants to bring it up. Okay. I let them bring it up. So there's a couple things I teach along the way. I teach a thing called a respect contract, which teaches the reps how to have the courage and confidence to ask the questions we want to ask, to earn the right to ask the questions that need to be asked. And so that when if you've gone through a good respect contract and pricing comes up, you can acknowledge it. And, there are lots of times, I'll give you the one example people come to me with is, Richard, my SDR gets on the phone, they're 2 minutes into the conversation, they're just trying to qualify. And the person on the other line goes, hey, Richard, just tell me what the price is. And so this is what I tell 99% of everybody to say, hey, John, I understand that pricing is really important to you. Happy to give that to you before we get off the call today. Mm-hmm. Before that, though, can we at least have a couple of conversations around what you're trying to accomplish, right? Hopefully, John's going to be human enough to go, yes.
Sure.
I would also probably turn it around and even say, hey, I'm happy to have a conversation with you about pricing and budget. Let's make sure we do. I promise we'll do that by the end of the call. But real quick, John, just before we even talk about that, we're 5 minutes into this conversation. Do you mind if I ask what's driving a conversation around budget first?
Yeah.
So now I flip it back to them, right? If they've asked me a question about a specific topic, that indicates to me that I've earned the right to ask them something back, right? Yep. And how you do it, your tone of voice, your pace is very, very important. Right. Yeah. So you can't just say, well, John, tell me what your budget is, right? Before I tell you price, you got to tell me budget. I don't want to know what their budget is. I want to know what's driving the question behind the budget, right? It's called question behind the question, because that's what we need to know, not what the budget is, right? Yeah. Oftentimes people will say things like, oh, I'm just asking now because I want to make sure we cover it. Okay, no problem. We'll cover it. Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm asking now because and I've had people say this, well, we've only budgeted X amount. I'm like, don't worry. We're going to be just fine. Right? They actually give it up before I've had to say pricing. Yep. I've had people say, oh, you know what? We're just putting our budget together. Well, that's a great piece of knowledge for me to know that they're just putting their budget together before I even give them my price. Because now I can actually try to help educate them on how to buy what I sell, which is sales training. Right. Well, let's talk about budget. By the way, if you're doing, this also allows me to bring up competition. Right. If you're still at that stage and you're asking me about price, well, that earns me the right to ask about competition because that means you're comparing price to something. Right. So there's lots of games you can play. I'm going to stop there because you and I will ramble if we're not careful. But.
No, I think it's good though. I mean, the idea, because I think to your point, I think everybody struggles, especially younger reps, struggle with price. Like I don't struggle with price at all because first of all, big fat pipeline, and I've gotten to the point in my career where I kind of know my value. I know what this training does for the right client. And so I'm unapologetic about it. I just say the price and I'm like, fuck it. If you don't like it, you don't like it. I don't give a shit. Right. Right.
I reference you all the time on that. People ask me about pricing. I'm like, I said, I'm waiting to get to that day where I can be a little bit more like John Barrows. I'm getting there, but I'm like, here it is and here it isn't. Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, cause at the end of the day, I think the sad thing that we've done as sales reps is we've conditioned people to assume a discount, and there's almost this chicken and eggs thing going on here, right? It's like, because there's an assumption that there's enough margin in there to get discount, and everybody wants to get something before they buy, right? But it doesn't have to be. I think the problem is that most reps think it has to be priced. But to your point earlier, they could be giving up on certain terms, on longer term contract. There's different things that we can get. And I'm very similar to you in terms of changing the vocabulary. So for instance, when the word discount comes up, I tell reps, remove that word from your vocabulary 100%. I don't mean remove discount from the vocabulary or from the actual discount, or just a word, and change it to creativity or flexibility, right? Look, I definitely have some flexibility in my pricing. I can definitely get creative with my pricing. Usually that comes in the form of longer term contracts or larger size deals. So when we get to that point in the conversation, we can have that, right? So again, kind of almost respect contracts, saying, look, happy to address discounting. Here's the framework of it, and we'll deal with it when it comes, as long as you're not having a heart attack that my price is way out of the range in the short term here, right?
Yeah, I'd like to put something out there too. The problem with discounting too isn't the reps, and it isn't lack of courage or confidence. And respectfully to all the VPs and CEOs, it's your fault. The problem is that on the 30th of the month, you guys will cut any deal you can to get the frickin' logo, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But then when the first comes along, and you're like, well, no more discounts. Well, it's kind of like, really? Like that's it. I've written about this, and I pondered this. I wrote about this, and I sat on it for 6 months because I was afraid I was going to upset clients. But you want to know the best day to buy anything, particularly if you're buying a SaaS solution? The 30th. Any day, any other day, you can get any deal you want.
Yeah.
They will all literally just almost give you anything. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry to say that, but it's not my fault that you can't hold your pricing ground. Hold the line, people. Hold the line. And that goes to the CEOs, the VPs of sales, the directors of sales. Don't get mad at the reps when you guys keep sending mixed signals. Okay?
Well, and that's where, no, you're spot on. I mean, that's unfortunately the short-term nature that we're in, right? Because especially companies that go public, right? Because now they're being measured by the market. And I've always said this, I think we're in this really brutal position right now of everybody knows quality is the answer, but we're still focused on short-term stuff. So that's why at end of month, and the biggest problem with closing in general is we close on our timeline, not theirs. Mm-hmm. Right? We have to close the end of the quarter. But if we're closing on your timeline, on your priorities, then I can pull challenger sale. Then I can push back on you and say, to your point, Richard, if I really understand what your needs are and what your priorities are and what the impact really is about making this decision or not making the decision, if those are genuine things, then when it comes time to close you, I can call you out on that shit. Be like, hold on a second, Richard. You said boom, 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 and boom. Like, I'm not putting words in your mouth. You said this, so that's why I'm pushing you to do this. But if you don't have those things, discount.
It's hard. It's really hard.
And everybody knows, by the way, I'm sorry, one more thing on discount. Everybody knows the discount doesn't go away at the end of the month. Like, everybody knows that. That's why it's such a sad way of selling, because I'm going to tell you, Richard, hey, you know what? I'll give you 20% off if you sign by the end of the month, right? Out of nowhere, even though I've done a really good job building rapport and relationship all the way through. Now I'm going to do a salesy, shitty thing, ruin the rapport, ruin your perception of me, ruin the value of my solution, offer you a discount at 20% if you say by the end of the month. So I might say, sure, fine. And then the end of the month comes and I get busy. I forget to do whatever it is. And then I call you on Monday. It's like, all right, I'm ready to go. Well, now you got to be the asshole either way. You either have to go to your boss and say, hey, can we extend this discount? Or you have to tell me no. And I know that discount didn't go. Your profitability didn't change over the weekend. You know what I mean? So that's
nobody went in the system and updated pricing.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So
I hear it all the time.
I got a question from Lucas as it relates to this. How do you feel about discussing the cost in terms of labor, consulting, et cetera, as well as the cost of the software solution?
Wait, say that again?
Yeah, Lucas, what do you mean by, tell me a little bit more about that. Do you mean like everything that's included in the price? So I think what he's saying is, you have your SaaS solution here, but, and I think, and I'll kind of iterate on this while he responds there, but I think, you have your hard cost, right? But then there's the stuff that the client should do. They should do training. They should do, the upfront on, the engagement process, right? They should have consulting in there, but a lot of reps are scared, so they put it in after the fact. Like, what are your thoughts about talking with somebody upfront about the entire package of what they should do versus selling them what you probably think they would buy?
I think it's easier, if I understand the question correctly, I think it's easier to start big and go small, right? It's easier to start with $75,000 and whittle it down, not from discounting,
Right.
but from discussing the services, what they want, what they don't want, what they really want to cut out, those kinds of things. It's easier to go from 75,000 down to another price, right? To a lower price. It's much harder to start here and go up. And I actually, look, I'm a sales trainer, right? And I still make mistakes. I made a mistake on a very big deal. In fact, John, I need to talk to you offline about it. I need my advice from my guru. You know, I included a price, and I said you're going to get so many licenses to my sales portal for what I want. And I didn't actually put in the pricing of the portal. I just said you're going to get so many licenses. And I never put in what the price of the number of reps they were going to have versus the number of reps I was going to give them a license for. And that became a point of contention in the negotiation process. Even after they saw it in writing on the proposal, once it came in on the contract, it didn't. They had a different thought in their head. So that's on me. That's my fault. So I had to do what I think everybody should do. Is I needed to make good, right? If granted, even though they could have read it and maybe figured it out, it's still my fault that I made it hard for them.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do good by them. And it made it harder for me to actually try and sell them up additional licenses.
Yeah.
So I think if I understand the question from Lucas, start with the whole thing, itemize each piece if you can, and then decide how you're going to present it to them.
Yeah, well, and I think that because it's way easy, because this goes back to your point of not discounting, right? Because then what happens is it's about taking things away, and nobody likes to have shit taken away from them. So it's like, okay, let's use your example. Okay, it's 75,000. It includes all these different things: online access, reinforcement, coaching, the days, all that stuff. And then they say, well, you know, geez, that's a lot. That's pretty expensive. It's like, okay, well, look, we don't have to do the online stuff. We can take that, so we can do, we can do the reinforcement, the remote stuff, and whatever else. But it won't include the portal licenses, and that'll be $50,000.
Right.
And it's like, well, but we want those. Okay, well, then you have to pay for them.
Now you can have an honest conversation about it, right?
Right.
And it wasn't that it was done dishonestly. It was just, something new for me too. So
yeah, I mean, and we all fuck around with it.
We all learn, right?
All right, let's see what happens. And that's why I think you and I have the luxury of being able to fuck around with pricing. Reps don't, unfortunately, right?
Yeah, as I tell people all the time, everything I get to say in training is in the bubble of Richard Harris's world. So be conscious that if I'm standing in front of you for 6 hours, I might be flippant and sarcastic, but it's because I'm in front of you for 6 hours and I got to get you to pay attention. Right. That's not how I want you to say it to customers.
Yeah, exactly.
We spend time role playing a lot. Well, what's that really going to sound like in your conversation compared to how Richard sort of explains it? So.
Let me ask one more question before we jump off here. Actually, it looks like Lucas clarified. If the software costs $500 a month, but it's going to cost you $5,000 to hire a consultant to migrate it over, and a quarter of an FTE, so a $6,000 solution costs $31,000 to the company, right? So they're buying it, but they have to spend all this extra time and maybe even hire a consultant to do it. Is that your place to talk to them about that as a sales rep trying to sell them just the software?
This other consulting piece.
Here's what I'm going to do. Like the transition costs, like to help them understand. Because to me, that's a little scary, right? Because now you're including a bunch of costs that are not really up to you. Yeah. But they're going to happen. So how open are you going to be on that?
I think this is the part where and I've done this because I've said this in the beginning of, I call it part of my respect contract, is that I always tell people, look, if I don't know the answer or I can't help you, I'm going to tell you. So if I'm a rep like you, Lucas, I think I would turn around and say something like, here's what I think you need to do. However, this is not what I'm tasked with. I'm really good at understanding this piece. I'm happy to help you navigate it, but I'm not the expert on that. Yeah. Right. And and I know it feels like a punt, but more importantly, what that says to your prospect is, hey, you know what? I care about you enough not to bullshit you. Right. What they want more than anything else in the world is people don't want to buy from people they like. They want to buy from people they trust. Yeah. And they're going to trust you more, Lucas. So I will even defer on this question from you, Lucas, to say, I may not be the right guy to answer that question because most of the training I do, most of the companies I work with don't have those separate pieces, right? They don't charge extra for the service side. So, take my advice for what you like, but I don't think I'm the right guy to answer the question, to be perfectly honest with you, Lucas. But I love the fact that you asked the question. So thank you.
Well, and I think that also depends on to your point, whether you're in a consultative sale, a competitive sale or not, right? Because if you're up against competition, that cost is going to be included regardless of what decision they make. So I say that's not my fucking responsibility to have that conversation. Right. But if they're just kicking tires, if they're trying to understand, then you can actually turn into the consultants, and say, well, you do realize you're not just looking at the hardcore costs here, right? You're looking at X, Y, Z. You're probably going to have to hire somebody. So whether you're looking at me or somebody else, this stuff, and now you're the honest sales rep telling them, like, it's not going to be $500. It's going to be $30,000 for that $500 thing, whether you look at me or somebody else. So I think, you can gauge it based on that. So
I agree completely.
Well, like you said, I think we could probably have this conversation all day because we do for a living, and we we're friends anyway. So, but I'm gonna put your link on this so the people watching this on live and also the replay. I'm gonna put that article that you wrote about Neat and the details of it in there so they can take a look at that. For those of you listening on the podcast, definitely go check out Richard and find his articles, Google them, and tell Richard, tell everybody what's the easiest way to find out information about you and the stuff you're putting out there.
Yeah, no, there are three great places to find me. One is on theharrisconsultinggroup.com, right? That's an easy place. I just hate the long URL I have. I have to figure out. I might have to have a name contest or something.
There you go.
So that's one place. I'm also the sales trainer for Sales Hacker, so you can always get a hold of me through Sales Hacker. And then obviously LinkedIn is probably the easiest and fastest. That seems to be where most people are going these days anyway. Yeah. Those are probably the easiest ways to get a hold of me. If you really want to call me, my number is 415-596-9149, 596-9149. If you're an SDR and you're going to try and cold call me, bring your A game. All right.
There you go.
Prepare to be reported.
So. I love it. Awesome, man. Well, it's always a pleasure talking to you as usual. Hopefully people got some good nuggets out of this for everybody listening. By all means, please check out the podcast. Also, Richard, and I don't think I told you this, we have a Friday afternoon happy hour that we now do. So Morgan and I on the Facebook group that we're doing. So it's on the Make It Happen group. And it's a Friday happy hour. So that's where we just open it up for an hour, do a full-blown Q&A. So
I know, but there's like happy hour East Coast. It's 5:30. I'm still working. It's like
I know. Well, that's why you can watch it after the fact. That's why you can download it and engage after the fact. So
that's awesome. And by the way, John, I wouldn't be a good friend if I didn't ask you how the Patriots are doing. Are you excited? Is Des Bryant coming? Is he not coming? What are you doing?
We'll see what happens. I don't take any guesses during the offseason with the Patriots because all bets are off. All bets are off up until about the second or third game in the season because they fuck around all the way through preseason. Then the first couple of games, they always shit can at least two or three of the top people. Right. I wouldn't be surprised if Belichick right now is just like, eat shit, Gronk. We don't want you anyways. Peace. I wouldn't be surprised at that at all.
You're okay with Amendola being in Miami now?
Yeah, it doesn't shock me at all. It's the beauty of being a Patriots fan. You don't get emotionally tied to anybody. So,
well, there's at least one you're going to be emotionally tied to.
Of course, but he's going to retire on his own terms. So we'll see what happens.
Right. Okay, hey, John, thank you so much for having me. This is, as always, it's a lot of fun. It doesn't feel like work ever having a conversation with you.
Likewise,
so thanks for having me.
Thanks, bud. Talk to you soon.
See you, bud.
Later.